Good morning, everybody. My name is Philip Steenkamp, president of Royal Roads University, and I'm going to be your MC today. I'd like to welcome Viola Tian, today's presenter, who I will introduce shortly. I'd also like to welcome and share my thanks with Associate Director of Human Rights and Equity, Diversity and Inclusion, Alejandro Campos Garcia, who organized today's session on this really important topic. And of course, welcome to all of you who are joining us today from your spaces. Of course, we always begin our meetings with an acknowledgement of the lands we find ourselves on, and it was with much appreciation that I recognize, of course, that the campus is located on the traditional lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. It is with deep gratitude that we work, live, and learn here, where the past, the present, and the future of Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, faculty, and staff come together. Haishka CM. So just a few housekeeping items, and then we'll get started. Your microphones have been muted to begin today, but you can obviously ask questions using the chat. There's also a dedicated question and answer session towards the end of the talk. And feel free to leave your camera off or on, but I would say it's always nice to see a few friendly faces when you are presenting virtually. Now, throughout the month, Royal Roads has been celebrating Asian Heritage Month by sharing resources and voices from our university community. We launched the month with a video discussion with intercultural communication expert, Professor Joanna Du, who spoke with me about understanding and collaboration across cultures. We also shared a video where diverse students talk about their heritage and how they stay connected to their roots. And you can find those videos and those resources and events on our Asian Heritage Month webpage. And I really encourage you to check it out if you haven't had the chance to yet. So I'm so very pleased today to introduce our speaker, Viola Tian, Anti-Asian Racism Lead at the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. And today we'll hear from her about some of the work the Canadian Race Relations Foundation and the Coalition Against Anti-Asian Racism Canada have been doing to address anti-Asian racism and how we can collectively combat it as a society. She's also going to speak about what it means to be Asian and how anti-Asian racism manifests across different spaces. Viola Tian is a passionate champion for social justice. Her leadership within the National Coalition Against Anti-Asian Racism Canada underscores her unwavering dedication to combating discrimination as part of a federal initiative. Viola has a rich Chinese Korean heritage and has dedicated herself to bridging communities and fostering understanding. Viola, we are so grateful to have you here today to speak with us, and I'm going to turn this over to you now. Thank you, and welcome to Royal Roads.
Thank you so much, Philip, and thank you so much for the invitation. Good morning, everyone. My name is Viola Tian. I'm the Anti-Asian Racism Lead here at the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, the CRF. And like Philip mentioned, I also oversee the file of the Coalition Against Anti-Asian Racism Canada, short for CARC, which I will introduce very shortly. My pronouns are she, her. On behalf of the CRF and CARC, I would really like to offer my thanks to Royal Roads University for organizing this event, of course, in honor of Asian Heritage Month. Again, thank you so much for the invitation. And I've seen those videos that you guys have been talking about in the opening remarks. Those are lovely videos, so I highly recommend everyone to check that out. I'm joining today from Toronto, Treaty 13, the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. And throughout the presentation, I will also implore all of us to consider our relationship to this land. And I recognize as a settler to this land that we all bear the responsibility of honoring and respecting the past and present contributions and connections of Indigenous peoples with this land. So as we gather here today, I will encourage all of us to commit to continuous learning from each other and with Indigenous communities, and to understanding our shared history, and also to actively participating in the ongoing process of truth and reconciliation. So as you can see, okay, let me just share my slide. Give me 1 second. Please let me know if you can see it. Yes. Okay. Give me 1 second. So as you can see from the slide here today, this is this year's theme for 2024 for Asian Heritage Month is preserving the past, embracing the future, amplifying Asian Canadian legacy. So I would like to use today's opportunity to celebrate the rich history and cultures of contributions of Asian Canadians, but I really would like to also confront and discuss some of the significant challenges that Asian Canadians have faced due to anti-Asian racism. So specifically, like we mentioned in the opening remarks, what anti-Asian racism is and how it manifests in different realms of our society. And I really hope that by the end of this presentation, that we'll all gain a deeper understanding of what anti-Asian racism means, and reflect on the ways that we can address it together as a society. So for some backgrounder, I'm from the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. The foundation was created by the government of Canada as a crown corporation in 1996 as part of the Japanese-Canadian Redress Agreement. And as you can see here, the CRF is committed to facilitating learning, development, and sharing of knowledge and expertise that will contribute to achieving the elimination of racism and all forms of racial discrimination here in Canadian society. So we have a domestic mandate and focuses on raising public awareness on the causes and manifestations of systemic racism within Canada. And we have been working with a lot of community groups and organizations in Canada through our granting program, the National Anti-Racism Fund, Services and Network of Public, and we've done a lot of research with community partners as well. And these days, our policy team have been busy launching the hate crime training program across 12 cities in Canada to help shape anti-racist public policy. So that is also our strategic priority moving forward. So I mentioned that I am leading this coalition called Coalition Against Anti-Asian Racism Canada. So I would like to just touch on briefly about what this coalition is about, and maybe some ways for us to think about how we can amplify and support the work of the coalition moving forward as well. In Canada, anti-Asian racism refers to historical and ongoing discrimination, negative stereotyping, and injustices experienced by peoples of Asian origin, which can often lead to their ongoing social, economic, and political cultural marginalization, and oftentimes put them in a disadvantaged spot, and that can lead to disparate and unequal treatment. So we've all seen the huge uptick in anti-Asian hate during the pandemic as a response partially as a response to the rise in anti-Asian hate during the pandemic. In April 2021, the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, the CRF, was charged by the federal government to create a national coalition to support Asian communities in Canada. So then, since then, we've done a lot of consultations with Asian Canadian groups across the country to try to understand the community-specific challenges and their vision for the coalition. So how the Asian communities would really like to come together to address anti-Asian racism. So after months of strategizing, convening, and bringing people on board to discuss their visions, eventually this coalition was launched last summer in July 2023. And we're very proud of this coalition because it's first of its kind. It's a first national Pan-Asian coalition to come together to address anti-Asian racism. So that is the point that I want to highlight. That's the first of its kind. And right now is being led by an intergenerational steering committee. And this is the beautiful picture of all of the steering committee members when they came together in Vancouver to set the vision and mission for the coalition. So now it's being led by 14 members, and they come from a variety of different backgrounds and expertise, and many of them live and work in 7 different, they come from like 7 different provinces and 1 territory, and we really try to be mindful of to reflect the diversity among Asian communities and to also consider an equitable gender and cultural balance when we're trying to put this coalition together. And these are some of the strategic priorities for the coalition. Like I mentioned, this is a national coalition, so a lot of our focus will be addressing national issues that emerge. But because we have all these leaders dispersed in different provinces and different territories, so we're also trying to be mindful of the regional realities that might emerge from different regions in Canada. But these are the 3 ongoing priorities for the coalition. One is to, I guess I can speak to the 3rd point first, like to raise public awareness and to increase public education on anti-Asian racism. And the second one is to deepen relationships within and among Asian Canadian communities to really create a capacity within and capacity to mobilize within Asian communities. And the third one is it can speak to some of the work of the CRF that we really want to create policy change. So that is our last area for focus for the coalition. Okay, enough about the coalition and about the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, which I'll share all of these resources after the presentation as well with the organizers. So I think in honor of Asian Heritage Month, I've thought about many ways of starting this topic and this presentation. And I think for me, a really good starting point is really to think about who are Asian Canadians? Who are Asians in Canada? Like, what do people mean when they really refer to an individual or a group as Asians? And like, which Asian community identifies as Asians? So all of these nuanced understanding about Asian Canadians, I think this is a really good starting point for today's presentation. And I'll be very honest with all of you guys. I came here at the age of 19 when I came here for Queen's University. So I didn't really have a lot of understanding around what racism is or what racism towards me or racism towards Asian Canadians would really look like, let alone like in some of the educational settings. So that's why I think giving a presentation like this in a post-secondary setting is very important to me, because this is a place usually where a lot of students will start to form and consolidate their ideas around race and identity. So it's important to start with these 2 examples that I listed here. And by the way, this is a book that I highly, highly do recommend for all of the educators in Canada. It's an article that it's a book that talked with the title Too Asian. So it was derived from this controversy, mainly from the one in 1979, the W5 controversy, and the 2010 Maclean article called Too Asian. So in these 2, for those who are not really familiar with these 2 controversies, the 1979 W5 controversy stemmed from Canadian television network CTV. They aired a segment titled Campus Giveaway, which argued that Canadian students, quote unquote, were being denied university spots because academic policies gave preference to foreigners, who later turned out, after much digging and investigation, that those students that they refer to as foreigners were actually Canadian citizens of Chinese descent or landed immigrants. And similarly, in the 2010 Article 2 Asian, the article also implied that there is a perceived demographic imbalance on Canadian university campus. So these are just some of the insights that I've summarized from these two examples. So the term Asian in these articles were usually used to lump together anyone of East Asian descent. And it didn't really matter of their status in Canada, whether or not they were Canadian citizens or landed immigrants or foreign exchange students. They were all put together under this label called Asian, and simply implying that they were taking away other white student spots in universities. So, and also there is this erasure of unique experiences of those Canadians of Asian ancestry roots in Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Central and West Asia. So I guess what I really want to say here is that these events have really painted Asian students as foreigners and outsiders, really contributing to a culture of exclusion and discrimination. And these articles lacked an nuanced understanding of Asian Canadians and have been historically portraying contributing to a lot of stereotypes that we see today, that we see frequently being associated with Asian Canadians. And we are typically stereotyped as academically inclined, yet we were socially awkward, we're aggressive, we're sometimes overly ambitious. So these stereotypes really strip individuals of our nuanced identities, casting us as perpetual foreigners, as students who are unable to integrate into the mainstream, predominantly what I would say like a white society. So I think these examples are really telling that they've reinforced this false narrative where Asian Canadians were, and often still are, not seen as true Canadians, but as outsiders. And I really want to highlight that like how this term Asian itself was oftentimes used very vaguely and imprecisely, lumping together many diverse cultures and unique experiences of different Asian communities into a single oversimplified category, I would say. So now we've arrived at this question, like who is Asian Canadian? Let's clarify what we mean by Asian Canadians. So the term Asian Canadian really entails local communities whose origins stem from Asia. And it's very important to note that all of these communities sometimes do not self-identify using this term, and there's no single Asian community here in Canada. So when we use this term Asian Canadian to refer, therefore, it's not to refer to a pre-existing category of people, but it's more of a way to acknowledge the ways in which these diverse migrant Asian communities within Canada have forged their meaningful relationships with both Canada and also with their homeland in the Pacific. And a very important thing to note here also is that anti-Asian racism looks different in different Asian communities. So how the coalition defines the diversity among Asian Canadians, or how we define the term Asian Canadian, is that we've tried to include to be representative and reflective of all of these diversities among Asian Canadians here. As you can see, there's East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, West Asia, and then Central Asia. And I think there's a really interesting sentiment that sometimes we tend to ignore, is that after the article broke out, the writers in the magazine, they refused to apologize for the longest time because they were arguing that there is no such thing as anti-Asian racism, that is not real, that we don't have it as bad as other communities. So this became a huge point of contention after the release of the article. So I think this really exemplifies the denial and minimization of racism that a lot of Asian communities, even until this day, like we continue to battle to make us feel seen and heard in a lot of the cases. And so I want to say that a lot of times when you talk to friends or family members, they will say, "Oh, like the racism in the U.S. is so bad." But I think we also have to acknowledge that anti-Asian racism is also very much alive here in Canada. While different Asian communities experience racism differently, um, some might experience while all of us might experience being otherized, specific experiences of anti-Asian racism really do vary from one community to another. Sometimes we're perceived as a threat. For example, the stereotype of yellow peril, some might face gendered exotification and violence, and some are more subjected to online hate, and there are more specific religious-based discrimination, such as Islamophobia. So like it really varies, and I really want to emphasize that Asian Canadians were not a monolith. There is such a huge diversity within our community, and I would like to just quickly show this video. That is one of my favorite videos. I think it beautifully summarizes the experience of Asian Canadians here.
We have never been a loud people. Our elders always taught us that actions speak louder than words, so we learn to keep our heads down, keep our grades up, keep our kin close, keep our mouths shut. I wonder, what it does to a people when they stay quiet for so long. Do they forget their voice? The sound of their stories, the resilience of language? When you are no longer in your motherland, does your mother tongue still sing of home? What work songs lifted our spirits as we built the railroad? What prayers did we whisper as they sent us to camps in the mountains to meditate on all the ways we don't belong to this country? So we stayed quiet. As they burned our Chinatowns down and spit on our grandmas at bus stops, we stayed quiet. As they laughed in our faces and told us to go back where we came from, but they've mistaken our silence for compliance. Looked on our meekness as weakness. See, we, and not the submissive stereotype that's been depicted on silence, on us, they've gotten it twisted. See, silence is golden, as are we. A gradient of yellow to brown, every Koreatown a little Saigon, an act of defiance. Every hunchbacked elder a humble giant. Silence is grace in the triumph, is peace in the riot. Silence is bold, a force. It is the brewing calm before the coming storm, and now the sky is splitting open and the rage is pouring forth, so this is for every kid who has ever tried to pull their nose bridge to make it taller. Every time they mocked us because our eyes are smaller. This is for our elders, both alive and remembered, for their lessons, the tough and the tender. For our full names, past and present, may they be pronounced, may they be respected. For every chink in the national fabric, every nip in the winter wind of prairie towns and northern hamlets coast to coast on stolen land. We are here. We've been here. From takeout joints and internment camps to internships and graduation caps, we are strong. We have pride. We fight. We fall. We rise. And to the ones who say we don't belong, it's them who should open their eyes.
I would highly encourage all of you to check out this video, as it's a beautifully narrated video by Christopher, and he's also one of our steering committee members as well for the coalition. So fast forward to today, like I mentioned before, I think all of you have seen this firsthand during the pandemic. Today, anti-Asian racism really continues to manifest through microaggressions, systemic racism, discrimination, and overt acts of hate, especially, I think, exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And these acts are not isolated incidents, but I think it's very reflective of a larger pattern influenced by historical biases. And I've listed some of the stats here, and as you can see consistently, and these are some of the newest reports that I've included here. In 2022, reports of online hate and racism against Asian Canadians increased by 132%. And the highest number of reported incidents continue to occur in public spaces. In 2023, and this is a joint research study that the CRF has conducted with Angus Reid Institute, the Chinese Canadians are reporting a threefold increase in physical attacks by strangers. And in 2024, from the Stats Canada report, hate crimes targeting the South Asian population have increased 3 years in a row. So I think very much like how Asian students, like I mentioned in the Maclean's report, that they were portrayed as a threat to white students. Whenever there's a crisis during which Asians were treated as scapegoats and held responsible for it, I think you would inevitably see a huge surge in anti-Asian sentiment across the country. And I think this undercurrent just became the very dominant narrative during the pandemic. So I think what we can see here that this persistent increase on anti-Asian hate reflects the nature that this is a systemic problem. It's not a series of isolated acts. And we'll see how we've seen firsthand of how the rise in anti-Asian hate have affected lives very, very deeply. And since we're talking about BC, so I've also put a little bit more local context here as well. In BC during the pandemic, I think it was labeled as the anti-Asian hate crime capital of North America. Is the top 10 most, the reports that came out from Vancouver was more than the top 10 most populous US cities combined. And in another study that I just mentioned that we jointly conducted, it finds that 66 respondents in BC identify anti-Asian discrimination as a problem in their province. But here's a very interesting that I want everyone to reflect on, because according to the data from the Vancouver Police Department, there were 204 hate incidents or crimes in the city reported from 2020 to 2022. And you see this seemingly decreasing trend in anti-Asian hate crimes. So in 2022, there were only 44 reported incidents. So does that mean that there is a potential decrease in the trend of anti-Asian hate? And this is a very, very important lesson that I really want everyone to walk away from, is that why hate crime data really cannot capture the scope, the true scope of anti-Asian violence. And I've included some quotes here that I will not read them out loud, but due to time reasons, but basically due to language barriers and the long-standing distrust in between community members and law enforcement, it can really skew the true scope of the issue. Because according to a lot of community reports, the number in anti-Asian hate crimes have been increasing, steadily increasing for the past few years. But then according to the police website, it seems like the problem is actually getting better. So, but in real life, for some of the reports that we've done with Angus Reid, it actually found that nearly 2 in 5 Asian Canadians do not tell everyone about the anti-Asian hate that they have personally experienced. And Asian Canadian men are 18% more likely than Asian Canadian women to report a racist threat, while Asian Canadian women are 23% more likely than Asian Canadian men to tell only their friends and family. So underreporting remains as a very huge issue that still needs to be addressed until today. And these stats are just some of the newest stats from ACT Foundation in 2024. It's from earlier this year. So you can see that 74% still witness racism against people of their same race in the last year. So by this point, I think we can all arrive at a conclusion that anti-Asian racism is a systemic problem. And it's cyclical and it's ongoing. It's prompted by both historical injustice as well as present day stigmatization, stereotyping, and scapegoating. And we know that anti-Asian racism is not new. Asian communities in Canada have long been subjected to violence and xenophobia that manifested in discrimination through voting and drug laws, exclusionary immigration policies, and forced relocation and displacement for internments of Japanese Canadians. And I've listed some historical events here. And I don't have the time to play this video anymore, but I would also recommend everyone to go check out this video produced by Historica Canada. There's a quote in there that one Chinese worker died for every mile of track laid through the Rocky Mountains. So in the video, it would detail how Chinese railway workers will volunteer themselves for the incentive for bringing their families or bringing their wives onto the boat to come to Canada. But many of them lost their lives because they're doing the most dangerous tasks throughout that process. But very interestingly, if you Google all of the images of railroad workers who have constructed for commemoration photos, then you will not see any Chinese workers on there. So they were left out of celebration, and they were and it can speak to the erasure and minimization of contributions of Asian Canadians here in Canada. So for the present day, I think the COVID-19 pandemic has really brought a new wave of anti-Asian hate. But I think what I really want to emphasize here is that international events sometimes also have impacts for Asian Canadian folks here as well. And we've seen this through, I think most recently, the Canada-China, like the ongoing rivalry in Canada, India, the international geopolitical conflicts, and how that have really intensified the national security measures against some of the Asian communities here in Canada. And the coalition have actually looked into some of these links. So like Canada's over-securitization, and it's linked to an already very troubling rise, I would say, in anti-Asian racism. So, and now I think for those of you who know this, the government of Canada is looking into introducing a new foreign interference bill as well. So I think for the past few years, we've been talking with a lot of Chinese and Chinese Canadian academic community members, and they are very, very concerned about the extent to which these stringent security measures imposed on them will really impact their human rights and impede their research opportunities. And for some of them that we've talked to, we've witnessed like the complete dismantling of their entire research areas within Canada without any prior consultation or discussion. So I think not only have we seen this in academic communities, we've also seen the broader impact on a lot of the community groups as well. We've worked with some of the community organizations in Montreal when they were being suspected as police stations here in Canada, and how we were helping them to try to navigate some of the national security measures that have inevitably impacted and the wider community and created this feeling of distrust and alienation, and really, I would say, just a climate of fear among a lot of Asian communities here in Canada, that they feel like they have to, there's a risk of maintaining their culture or familial ties with their homeland. And you've also seen this in media portrayal, in political rhetoric. We've heard enough about Trump's Wuhan virus. So a lot of political rhetoric can also have a huge impact on how some of the stereotypes like perpetual foreigners and yellow peril can really manifest themselves like throughout the pandemic or throughout crisis. And you've also heard housing crisis or inflation crisis. So whenever there's a public health crisis or an economic crisis, you've seen a lot of you will also witness this huge spike in the rise of anti-Asian hate. So what are some of the challenges that I've mentioned? I think really it comes down to 4 areas. One is the lack of awareness of racism among and against Asian communities here in Canada. And I think a really important point I would like to raise here is the lateral violence among Asian communities as well. So we really do have to raise awareness about all of these issues. And the second point is the lack of data and research. I think there is a lack of investment and funding in Asian studies or research on Asian communities is actually very, very scarce and often co-opted by a lot of white researchers and people outside of the community. And I've recently had a conversation with this PhD social worker because we're trying to put together some data around all of the initiatives and efforts that are being done to address online hate in Asian communities in Canada, but she really had a lot of trouble coming up with research papers and data. So there is a huge gap there that we need to fill as well. And I've mentioned a lot about harmful stereotypes and othering and continued exclusion, silence, and invisibility that we all feel as Asian Canadians. The last point that I would mention here is intersectionality. So really, there is, even within Asian communities, like different socioeconomic status, different classes, there is a huge, there's a huge diversity like among us, and we're not all model minorities. We're not all seen as economically and educationally very, very successful. That sometimes can be used against us and can be used like to pit against other racialized communities that we don't have it as bad. We're seen as model in this country. So really to consider immigrants, newcomers, refugees, and asylum seekers, youth, seniors, low-income Asian Canadians, to LGBTQI+, identifying individuals, there is a huge vulnerability and marginalization of certain groups within Asian communities here as well. So what is being done about anti-Asian racism? I mentioned the coalition before, and these are some of the examples. We've seen the video, we've seen on the TTC, that there is Toronto for All campaign that is going on right now. And some of the university have issued their statements. I've also seen the National Anti-Asian Racism Forum that was hosted at UBC a few years ago. So here are some of the key takeaways that I would like everyone to walk away with. The first one I mentioned is to support and participate in our future activities or initiatives. The coalition have an upcoming policy forum that will discuss online hate and the newly released online harms bill. So we'll have community members who react to that bill to identify some of the gaps and inconsistencies to try to improve the bill. So that will be a very interesting discussion for those of you who are very interested. And of course, to raise awareness of anti-Asian racism, like I mentioned, data collection to collaborate on future opportunities to study the nature and prevalence of anti-Asian racism and its manifestations, internal DEI building for a lot of universities to really embed DEI into their, not only just their policies, but really into their structure and to their strategy as well. And the last one is allyship and support to educate yourself on the history of anti-Asian racism, to understand how different stereotypes, racial bias, and xenophobia have been impacting Asian Canadians, to call out racism when you see it, and combating racism, it requires collective efforts from all of us. So show up and really take action and be vocal. But I think throughout all of the efforts that we've done, we need to be mindful of the approach that we take to try to always center the voice of Asian Canadians in our DEI efforts as well. So that'll be all. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And I hope this was an informative session. And I also hope that this kind of insights from this session will be carried forward, not just during Asian Heritage Month, but also throughout the year to really ensure that the fight against anti-Asian racism remains consistent, remains strong for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Viola. Thank you. That was an incredibly powerful presentation concerning in many respects the information you shared with us, but very thought-provoking. I do know you have another appointment at 10:45, so I'm going to suggest we take a question from the audience. And folks, again, you can put this in the chat, or I'll ask if there's anybody who wants to raise a hand, although I'm not necessarily going to see you all, but maybe Lisa, have you seen some questions?
Haven't seen any questions yet. If you do have a question, I think we'll have time for one question. Please feel free to put that in the chat. Thank you.
There's always the awkward pause while we get the first question going. See how we're doing. Okay, well, I'm not seeing anything, and I know we are short of time, but maybe I could ask a question. And you did at the end give us a sort of set of things we could do to, really to work on combating anti-Asian racism. I wonder if you could comment a little more about the particular role that universities can play in this space and why it's so important.
Yeah, for sure. I think regarding universities, I think the first thing that comes to mind is to really support students in their own initiatives and their movements. And I've seen this at U of T as well, that they've really adopted all of the recommendations from their, after they've done consultations with hundreds of Asian students on campus as well. So really listening and centering the voice of Asian students when you are trying to come up with resources and recommendations to improve your internal DEI practices. I think that is a really good practice. And another thing that would come to mind is really the research aspect for universities. Like I mentioned, there is a lack of research and data in Asian studies and in studying the nature of anti-Asian racism. But I think the most important aspect I will mention is to really study the impact of anti-Asian racism on people's mental health. There have been a lot of research coming out studying the prevalence of anti-Asian racism here in Canada, but few study, very, very few will study the impact of anti-Asian racism on people's daily lives, on their mental health. So that is a research gap that a lot of universities, I think if they are intentionally trying to fill that research gap, that will be a very helpful way to approach this issue. And really, I think a third thing that I will mention is to educate, is to spread awareness. And I think that video that RU has created is a really, really great start to create more awareness of the diversity among Asian Canadians, that we're not a monolith, that there is a great diversity among us, that we all bring our own experience, lived experience to the society. So fostering that supportive environment for students from diverse backgrounds is also a very good approach as well. So those are just some of the insights that I have for universities, I would say.
Viola, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I think a very powerful call to action. And I think we have a really important role to play And as you pointed out, you know, progress isn't linear on these issues. Things you think have gone away have not really gone away. They just resurface in different forms. And with the geopolitical tensions we've seen right now in Canada, but also south of the border, you know, there's huge potential here for another kind of significant rise in anti-Asian racism. So I think as a community, you've given us a really powerful list of things to work on, and I really want to thank you for that, and a very stimulating discussion today. I want to thank Alejandro and the Royal Roads Communications and Multimedia Services folks for supporting the event, but I really want to thank the Royal Roads community too for your interest and your engagement in listening to our amazing guest speaker today. I certainly learned a lot. And it's important for us to spend time together in these kinds of spaces to consider these issues and to figure out what we can do to make a difference. So with that, I want to thank you again so much for your presentation and wish you a good day and wish everybody else a good day here as well. So goodbye for now, everybody. Good to see you all.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you so much.